Welcome to today's History Curriculum Site Study number 2 on Dawn Fraser Baths in Balmain. Firstly, today I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to Aboriginal elders past and present and acknowledge their young people who will be our future leaders.
My name's Helen Nicholson, and I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation. This site study that I have produced is actually on Gadigal and Wongal lands of the Eora Nation, and it's also where I work, live and play. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and we are grateful for the way that land was tended and cared for millennia. I have a lot of fun doing these site studies, and certainly putting this one together for the Inner West Council was a lot of fun. So it is on the Dawn Fraser Baths, which are at Balmain. Balmain is a suburb of Sydney. It's about 5 kilometres from the Sydney CBD, and it's surrounded by water on 3 sides. Because it's surrounded by water and because we have shell middens in the area that go back 4,500 years, it actually was an area where the Gadigal and the Wongal people would take food. They would get seafood, they would get fish, and there were animals in the area. So we are grateful for them. It is significant. Those middens are recognised as being significant by the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, as well as by archaeologists. What we see today, though, at Balmain is very different from what was there pre-European invasion in 1788. And this site study looks at that area over time. Site study is mandated in the New South Wales history syllabus for Stage 4 and Stage 5 students. And it gives students a way of engaging with an area, with their local history, and a way of understanding historical context and changes that have occurred. It offers students a means of interpreting the past and recognising how basically it has changed over time. Underlying that, though, is the hope that it is enjoyable and that it engages students and creates a lifelong love of history, and especially gets students to look at their local history, what's going on in their environment and their area. They don't need to go to this site. Everything you need for this site study is online. It also hits many of the objectives in the New South Wales history syllabus, and students get to understand what's significant, knowledge, understanding of ideas, movements, people. It also allows students to develop skills to undertake historical inquiry and communicate their understanding of that. You're familiar with this wheel that's in the syllabus, and just picking up on some of those historical concepts and skills that this site study on the Dawn Fraser Baths touches on. Continuity and change. Students investigate the use and occupants of the site from pre-1788 up to the aquatic centre and surrounding parks encountered today. Cause and effect, the increase in female participation in swimming and lifting of restrictions for swimming costumes and access to the baths for women. The importance of swimming, as far as significance goes, the importance of swimming and its impact on shaping modern Australia, comprehension in the form of terms, concepts, and creating a chronology. For example, students have to sequence historical events and they sequence a chronology of the Dawn Fraser Baths in the worksheets that are provided. They also will have to analyse and use a wide range of primary and secondary sources, some of which are more reliable and useful than others. And then explanation and communication, they will need to select and use evidence to communicate about the past. So where it really hits is the depth topic, making a nation, so living and working conditions around the turn of the 20th century. And this is especially with regard to women's participation in swimming, but also popular culture, so the contribution of Australian women to international sport. As a sideline, because it's their swimming baths, it also touches on aspects of the New South Wales 7 to 10 physical activity and sports studies syllabus. So it does that by looking at the historical participation of women in competitive and recreational swimming, the way men and women were segregated for swimming, and changes in female swimming costumes over time. Now, I mentioned that Balmain was a peninsula surrounded by water, and we have a description that is made by an old-time resident. What you're looking at here, I should add, and I'm going to read out the description to go with this. This is a painting of Cockatoo Island from Balmain, made by John Skinner Prout, and literally you look out to Cockatoo Island from the Dawn Fraser Baths today. So it gives you an idea of the vegetation that would have been there. And this is what, this was probably painted around 1850, in the 1850s, but this is what an old timer had to say about the site in 1907. He's recollecting when he first went to Balmain in 1841 and what it was like then. As we pulled our boats towards the shore, I saw nothing but bush everywhere. If I remember aright, the trees were not tall and straight, but rather of the nature of shrubs, tea tree prevailing, I think. Wildflowers grew in abundance, plenty of birds, snakes, wallabies, bandicoots and native cats. I do not remember seeing one solitary house in Balmain. However, we do know from, and again, these students will have this source as well, this other source as well, we do know that people started living there in the 1830s. So Balmain was the original, he was with the First Fleet, the assistant surgeon, and all of what is now Balmain and Rozelle were part of a 500-acre land grant that he received. So this is the description, and it pretty well fits with what I read out when you look at the picture that we've got there. And this is what it looked like in 1906. So what you're looking at here is you can see that houses have been built. I've got an arrow there pointing to, they're now called the Dawn Fraser Baths, but up until the 1960s, when Dawn Fraser, a local girl, or local woman, I should say, won Olympic gold and Commonwealth Game gold medals for swimming, the name was changed. Up until then, they were known as they were actually known as the White Horse Point Baths, then changed to the Elkington Park Baths, and now the Dawn Fraser Baths. Elkington Park is behind. Whitehorse Point is the peninsula that is there. That's where middens have been found. And the arrow there is pointing to Fitzroy Avenue Reserve, where we'll see in a little minute where the National Box Company was formed. Okay, so with the first baths that were opened in 1882, and there've been about half a dozen changes to them, they were actually roofed. So you can see there, that's an artist's impression of what the first baths looked like. Now, the reason there was a roof on them is because in the Victorian period, people were very concerned about modesty. So they needed all those bodies and those men swimming there. They needed to be out of sight. And what we find is that the baths were mainly used by men, and women only had access on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10 and 12 and 2 and 4 p.m. What I want you to do is notice the lack of vegetation that are behind the baths, because that is very, very different today. Once we get to the beginning of the 20th century, the roof has disappeared, but it also gives you an idea of the suburb. And you can see one of those industrial chimneys in the background. That is actually the chimney and part of the Balmain colliery. Coal was mined at Balmain, and that coal mine shut. It literally is right up against Birch Grove Public School, about a kilometre from where the baths are, and that coal mine closed in 1931, but methane gas was collected from there until the 1950s. So the roof has gone, but essentially the baths are there. And this is what the baths look like today. Honestly, if you get a chance, you really should visit. They are absolutely delightful. But you'll notice just from 1906, you can notice the amount of vegetation that's in Elkington Park that's behind that the baths. Previously, there was none. The other thing too, again, this is an old photo. So we're looking here, and we can see this is around 1900. We can see there 2 rowing clubs that are there. The Balmain Working Men's Rowing Club and the Balmain Rowing Club. Of course, a nice little bit of healthy rivalry. And water polo was also important. Notice if you do go to Elkington Park, this is the sort of thing that with the students in the local inner west area, or for whom it's easy to get to, if they know what it looks like now and they have this image of what it looked like then, it's good for them to notice and be able to talk about and communicate that change over time. With all that remains, we have the storm took out one of the rowing clubs, but we've got the steps that are cut into the foreshore that go down to it. The other thing is, there's the colliery, and that big blocky building you can see in the background is Birch Grove Public School. And the other thing that is no longer there, literally on the grounds of the Fitzroy Avenue Reserve, is the National Box Company. So you can see the baths there. Notice how the suburb of Balmain is literally full of terrace houses and really, really tightly packed. Quite a high population density. Elkington Park, notice there's not that vegetation behind the baths, but do notice that National Box Company. They opened in 1925, and they used to mill timber and make pallets and cartons, crates there. That gives you an idea of what it was like. So where there is now Fitzroy Avenue Reserve today, it was once full of that timber, and you can see people at the baths there in the foreground. So quite a transformation. And what's really good is if you go to and buildings, once pallets went. We've got some buildings there. We have traces of the foundations of those buildings still at Fitzroy Avenue Reserve. And we've got cuttings into the sandstone. You can even find remains of drain pipes that are there. So literally that National Box Company with all that wood was in this area. So really highlights the importance of Balmain, essentially from the middle of the 19th century through until the middle, a little bit after, of the 20th century. It was a very important industrial and maritime suburb. Now, to get us onto a little bit of swimming, and I will say in the site study there are some plans and overhead projections where you can see the different factories that are there. But I really did get quite interested in swimming. And what I found very, very interesting is that back in 1810 there was a government order about soldiers and people, inhabitants, swimming naked basically in what is now Circular Quay. So it used to be that people, they didn't have bathers, so they would go for a swim there. And bathing, of course, being very popular. And women would also bathe. So Mrs. Biggs had some at area where women would actually go around where the Domain is and would actually go swimming, a very popular activity, just as it is today. However, the swimming costumes that people had are vastly different to what, well, in some ways they're not vastly different because we're going back to the rashies and the long sleeves. However, our bathers, or what we wear swimming today, is certainly not made of wool. Many of these bathing costumes were made of wool. They were incredibly heavy, and there was a serious problem that you could actually drown swimming because of the weight of the wool when it got wet. So we have, this popularity of swimming. The other thing is that once we get into the Victorian era, there were some real concerns about decency and morality. And this led to laws banning swimming in daylight hours at the sea. So not in pools or bathing, but in sea bathing was banned basically from 1838 through to 1902. And this really, it was applied to beaches that were within gazetted municipalities. So beaches popular. So we have these swimming costumes that really it would be like going swimming with your clothes on. Right through to, I absolutely love this 1930s pattern. This is one in the Women's Weekly where you could knit your own bathers. And we've got Dawn Fraser there, just comparing Dawn Fraser's swimming costume that she's wearing here in 1960 with what our swimmers wear today. So that's something that you may have students that are interested in women and swimming and sport and popular culture, because this feeds into that popular culture unit. There's some great resources, and you have links on the teacher's notes where you can get information on swimming, and especially women and swimming. So essentially, this is looking at White Horse Point today. I had a lot of fun at playing around with this, and I had so many sources. I could have had something like 300 sources in there. I found all of them interesting, but I had to cull them to make it reasonable. But hopefully with this site study, you will find it useful, one, to fulfill that need of a mandated history site study at stage 4 and stage 5. If you live in the inner west or you live in Sydney, hopefully you might be able to take a different perspective and see this area of Balmain in a different light. It's something you don't need to go there. Everything you need is online, the teacher's notes, the syllabus links, ongoing resources that you can link through to. Everything is referenced. There are worksheets for students, and a PowerPoint that you can use as an introduction. So good luck with your history teaching.